Right. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you, Guardians, for allowing us the opportunity to talk about this. Eve, unfortunately, is not with us today because she is in Washington, D.C., where she is meeting with more than a dozen congressional offices to provide updates on Alligator Alcatraz and other issues facing the Everglades. Given the bedrock environmental laws that are threatened, especially NEPA, and the immense government cost burden of the facility, the congressional oversight is extremely important. Otherwise, she would certainly be here speaking to you all. As we said, my name is Jessica Namath. I have been a resident for almost 40 years on the Loxahatchee River in Tequesta. I served for 5 years on Tequesta's Environmental Committee, Advisory Committee, and stepped down the month before last, for 2024, our state parks came under attack, which some of you might remember. I was able to put together a group called Protect Jonathan Dickinson State Park, of which we now have nearly 50,000 members, and we're successfully able to pass legislation to protect those parks. And the group, once doing so, transitioned into Floridians for Public Lands, because you might recall that we also had the Withlacoochee State Forest come under attack, and Guana River, which was one of our WMAs. So much like we did for the State Park Preservation Act, we would like to see similar legislation passed to protect our other public lands. We, Eve and I, after having worked together on the state parks, found ourselves once again frustrated and united when the governor seemingly won his state park or won his public lands battle by seizing land in Miami-Dade County through an emergency and his eminent domain for this facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. I first and foremost see it as, again, a public land seizure, because that is property of which only the runway has ever been fenced off, and my family and myself, along with many others, have enjoyed the other 20,000 plus acres of land that we no longer have access to go hiking or fishing, or people go out and photograph astronomy. You know, they'd enjoy the dark sky. So this, first and foremost, to me was, again, a public land seizure. I wanted to start. Do I click, or is somebody clicking here for me? I click? Okay. So I would like to reintroduce you all to Miss Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who is the founder of Friends of the Everglades, and who we love for saying, be a nuisance where it counts. Do your part to inform and stimulate the public to join your action. Be depressed, discouraged, and disappointed at failure and the disheartening effects of ignorance, greed, corruption, and bad politics, but never give up. She, along with another name you might recall, Mr. Nathaniel Reed, and many others, joined forces back in the 60s at this very site location that we're battling to save and get back again today, because there was a proposal to build the world's largest jetport. And she, along with her allies, with the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes, and many, many others, conservationists and passionate Floridians, were able to stop that from happening. But not before there was one runway that was built. And that one runway is where we're talking about today. Some of the things that I have realized through this battle is that there's confusion between names of different groups and the location of this facility. Friends of the Everglades is not to be confused with Everglades Foundation, for example. And they're the ones who have joined forces with Center for Biological Diversity to bring forth a federal lawsuit against the state and federal government to enforce the laws that should have been adhered to prior to any of this really happening to begin with, most importantly NEPA, which is our Environmental Protection Act, that if one federal dollar is spent on anything, we have to do an environmental assessment on it and go through a set of procedures that were not adhered to in this particular case. The other confusion that I sometimes hear is that this isn't located in the Everglades. People seem to be confused with Everglades National Park and the Everglades. As you can see in this map, the Everglades span a very broad distance, and the location of this facility is in Big Cypress National Preserve, and Everglades National Park is south of it, but it is most definitely in the heart of the Everglades. It is also in the heart of the Miccosukee tribe's ancestral homelands, and they are allies and partners that have joined on to the federal lawsuit as well. So this is something that is a very frustrating location choice for many people. Not only have we lost access as the public, but you have an indigenous community who for lifetimes, time immemorial, have used that land for ceremonial reasons and no longer have access to being able to collect medicine and things that they have always traditionally been allowed to do. There are camps that are less than 1,000 feet away, school bus stops that are less than 1,000 feet away from this facility. And when you hear the narrative that it's in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing there, that is factually untrue. You have many businesses and, again, an entire community and tribal village that are enduring the noise pollution, the light pollution, and all of the things that this has brought into their community. We have a timeline here that Eve had helped put together for us to kind of go back and recount how this all happened. On June 21st, the state of Florida made an unsolicited $20 million offer to buy the remote Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport from Miami-Dade County. I would also like to add that that airport had no potable water, no sufficient power. There's no refueling. There was no tower. It was simply a runway that was used for private aviation practice and some training. But in no way was this an active airport that had hundreds of flights a day coming in and out, or any of the other misinformation that might be floating around out there. On June 22nd, Miccosukee elder Betty Osceola, who lives around 3 miles, for example, from the facility, gathered with hundreds of us to peacefully oppose this seizure and the closing of these gates. She had called me a few days before this and said that gates that had never been shut in her lifetime were now closed, and land that she had led myself, for example, and my family onto and out into the beautiful Big Cypress National Preserve were no longer accessible. So we had a wonderful turnout of people that came to rally in support of land that they've always loved and enjoyed that we no longer had access to. On June 23rd, Miami-Dade Mayor Daniela Levine Cava responded to the state with a letter questioning the environmental impacts and the land's value, thinking it to be far more than $20 million. But Florida doubled down and invoked their emergency powers to start construction. That same day, Friends of the Everglades called on Governor DeSantis to halt the project. June 27th, Friends of the Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity filed a lawsuit against the federal and state governments in Miami-Dade County, demanding that the legally required environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act be adhered to. Knowing that this was going to be used as a detention facility for immigration, and immigration being a federal function, that seemed to make sense. On July 1st, the president toured the site alongside state and federal officials who confirmed FEMA would be matching funding much of the project. And at that point in time, there was a lot of praise at a federal level for this project. July 2nd, the first detainees arrived, and more generators than you can count, and lights came on property that was otherwise previously designated an international dark sky. There had not been a nighttime airplane landing in over 25 years, for example. And the impacts to the community and to the panther and to the bonneted bat and these endangered species were immediately felt. For those of us that were there, hearing that there was no environmental impact seemed, it seemed false, obviously. It's hard to understand how anybody could say that when you could stand on the side of the road and see, smell, touch, taste. Sometimes, all of the cars, the exhaust, the fuel, everything that was going on to build this facility. Because again, this was just merely a runway prior to that. And as it notes here, the skies, the lights were visible for more than 15 miles away at that point in time. It's since expanded even more. July 11th, Friends of the Everglades, Friends of the Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity filed a 60-day notice of intent to sue under the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, and National Parks Organic Act. The Miccosukee tribe's request to join as co-plaintiffs in a lawsuit was granted on July 30th. This is an example of one of the camps when we refer to a camp out there. These are camps where people have either live or they have ceremonial grounds, but there are many scattered in and around the facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. Guys, sorry, I apologize, wrong way. On August 7th, Judge Kathleen Williams granted a 14-day preliminary injunction to halt the new construction at Alligator Alcatraz. And that was a big win. I am a part of that federal lawsuit because I was able to sit and witness what was happening, and I, with my own two eyes, saw Customs and Border Patrol, and we saw a lot of federal agencies coming and going from the facility. Although we were told by the governor and state, federal levels at that point that this was not a federal project, it was state-run, which contradicted what we were seeing. On August 21st, Judge Williams ordered the state of Florida and federal government to halt construction, stop bringing in new detainees, and to begin winding down operations, which was a very big win and something that, again, the Everglades needed, because the impact over the course of that month was significant. We saw countless animals that were hit by the amount of traffic that was coming and going on a daily basis. Again, the displacement of things, even bears, panthers certainly were showing up on game cams in areas they had never shown up on before, simply because, again, the amount of traffic and noise and light that was being generated in an otherwise very quiet, peaceful, dark area was shocking and disturbing. Here we've got a lot of wonderful headlines, and people were very happy to see that there was going to be a pause until we could finish the lawsuit to hear whether or not NEPA needed to be adhered to. Unfortunately, in early September, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals voted 2-1 to pause the lower court's ruling, saying that 1, it was a state-operated facility, and that 2, Florida had not received any federal funding or reimbursement. Oops, sorry guys, thank you. Oops. Authored this, I apologize. So that Florida hadn't received any funding or reimbursement. And then in October, the U.S. government attorneys asked to stay the proceedings because of the government shutdown, and their request was granted. So there was at one point, we were hearing that we would go to the Circuit Court of Appeals in January, and they would hear this case. And because of the government shutdown, that has now been prolonged until March or April. I've, sitting in here, received a press release from the Miccosukee tribe that I would like to read some of to you guys. And it says that the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida, a federally recognized tribal nation at home in the Everglades, remains strongly opposed to Alligator Alcatraz's unpermitted and unlawful construction on public lands seized by state emergency order. The appellate's filing resumes the case, which was on pause since the government shutdown, and the tribe looks forward to the next hearing in March and April the upcoming briefings this month and next, and appreciates the venue to continue advocacy on behalf of Big Cypress and the tribal community. These legal developments follow very important political developments. A week after the 11th Circuit paused the Southern District of Florida's order suspending operation of the facility, and days before the shutdown, the state took $608 million in federal funds. This is almost $200 million over the original estimates to carry out the facility's federal immigration purpose. This federal funding occurs in the context of the 11th Circuit's statement that the state accepting federal funds would lead to a reconsideration of their order, which had paused the district court order in favor of the tribe. According to the circuit's September 4th order, quote, if the federal defendants ultimately decide to approve the request and reimburse Florida for its expenditures related to the facility, they may need to first conduct an EIS. An EIS being the relief requested by the tribe and co-plaintiffs. So in other words, by accepting these funds, the state has made a major concession, which, along with the evidence presented already, further establishes a clear federal nexus. We knew that somewhat to begin with, those of us that were on site and witnessing what we were witnessing, and the fact that the timing of these things played out as they had was very frustrating to those of us that would like to have seen the original preliminary injunction held so that this could be decided. What Eve and Friends of the Everglades are asking is for our help. We need to contact our state leaders and call our congressmen. There are ways of helping them fund their fight, of course, because this legal battle has now been drawn out and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future because of the complexities the state and federal government continue to bring up or claim to have. And Friends of the Everglades has started this Everglades Defense Fund, which is one of the ways, if people are interested, you can directly help fund this fight through your financial contributions. And Friends of the Everglades, it says, to counter the tremendous legal resources of our adversaries, this fund fuels our landmark lawsuit against Alligator Alcatraz and ensures we're ready to take on future threats. We very much need that support. In addition to that, there have been 3 bills filed that will be seen in this upcoming legislative session, because what has happened here is that the state has issued a state of emergency and has declared it on immigration. So for me, and somebody that has been fighting against the governor and these public land seizure attempts, whether it's golf courses or, well, they're all golf courses, it seems, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. In the state parks, with the Pucci State Forest and the WMAs, they want a lot of golf courses. But these executive orders and state of emergencies are allowing the governor to use eminent domain to seize things in land that he wants to use for said emergencies. Unfortunately, we don't have any parameters in place to determine when an emergency is over, how long it lasts, things that would be helpful in having a clear timeline of what we could expect or when we could expect this to be over. And instead, he just is continually renewing his executive orders. So there are 3 bills that have been filed, House Bill 621, Senate Bill 700, and SCR 704. Unfortunately, we are in the position right now where the powers that be seem to have a supermajority, and there's not a lot of support for some of these bills, and the likelihood of them even being heard is slim, but we don't give up hope. And I think that it shines light on a bigger issue that we have and need to recognize that we're setting a very dangerous precedent here, regardless of who is in power. And that is that anybody can declare a state of emergency and use their power to impose or take away things as they see fit. And we know that there have been public lands attacked across the country, and other governors in other states could look to see what we're doing here in Florida and think, well, I'll do this in my state. So I think that, again, regardless of what side you support or where, your beliefs stand, you would like to see some sort of rules and regulations or parameters in place for any state of emergency, regardless of what it's about. And again, I think that as we come into this next legislative session, having dealt with the state parks and the State Park Preservation Act and seen how much support our elected officials seem to show for public lands, which we know to have bipartisan support, there was not follow-up, for example, with funding of things. And it becomes tricky for those of us who are trying to follow along, but we are at a critical time where paying attention is necessary. Otherwise, all of these beautiful conservation lands and things we're trying to save and protect in the future are under threat. So I very much urge people to look carefully at policy and to see who is speaking about what. And I think, again, public lands and conservation have bipartisan support in this state, and that's something I know to be true. And we need to fight for our beloved wild Florida so that we can continue these wonderful initiatives from Martin County Forever and the Guardians and Loxalucy, because they're under attack. Our public lands and our wild Florida are under attack. So very much appreciate you listening to the updates on Alligator Alcatraz and hope that we can continue to raise enough noise about the location of this particular facility, which again is in the heart of the Everglades, is in the heart of where we have invested billions of taxpayer dollars to restoring flow that they are now paving 40 acres over and essentially clogging and blocking what we are funding to restore, which does not make very much sense. So, organizations that are fighting this from an environmental standpoint are certainly worthy of support. And there are many who claim to be defenders of the Everglades that are not speaking up right now. And I think, again, it's a very important time to pay attention to who's saying what and then who's doing what. So, again, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the Guardians giving us the opportunity to update you all. Thank you.